Some mistakes don't fade with time, they just wait for you to face them. Cole Merritt had learned that the hard way when his son stopped writing 20 years ago. Now the boy was coming home with a fiancée, and Cole knew he had one chance to make things right. But how do you prove you've changed when you're still alone in that same empty house? That's when he met Miriam Hayes, a woman who'd been running from her own past for just as long. He offered her a gold coin to pretend to be his wife for one day. She said yes because she needed the money. Neither of them expected what would happen when two people who'd given up on happiness started pretending they'd found it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Montana sky stretched endless and blue over Cole Merritt's ranch. The kind of sky that made a man feel both significant and small at the same time. From the porch of the main house, Cole could see nearly 3,000 acres of rolling grassland, dotted with cattle that moved like slow clouds across the green. He'd built all of this from nothing, from a patch of dirt and a stubbornness that wouldn't let him quit even when the winters tried to kill him and the summers tried to burn him out. The ranch hands called him fair but distant. They respected the way he worked alongside them, never asking them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. But they also noticed how he ate his meals alone, how he'd stand on this same porch every evening with a cup of coffee that went cold in his hands while he stared at the mountains. Cole Merritt was a man who'd built an empire but couldn't figure out how to fill the silence in his own home. The house itself told that story in every room. It was a substantial structure, 2 stories of solid timber and stone that had weathered 40 Montana winters. Anna had picked out the furniture, arranged the rooms, made the place feel like something more than just shelter from the wind. Her touch was still everywhere, in the quilts folded over the backs of chairs, in the curtains she'd sewn by hand, in the way the kitchen always smelled faintly of the herbs she'd dried and hung from the rafters. But Anna had been gone for 7 years now, taken by a fever that came on fast and left no time for goodbyes. Cole had kept everything exactly as she'd left it, as if changing anything would be admitting she was never coming back. The ranch hands' wives had offered to help him sort through her things, to put them away or donate them to folks who needed them. He'd thanked them politely and sent them home. His foreman, a weathered man named Hank Sutherland, who'd worked the ranch for 15 years, understood better than most what Cole was carrying. Hank had lost his own wife young and had raised 3 daughters on his own. He knew that grief wasn't something you got over. It was something you learned to carry differently as the years passed. Boss looks tired these days. Hank had mentioned to the other hands just that morning while they were fixing fence posts on the eastern boundary. More tired than the work should make a man. The younger hands nodded, but didn't say much. They'd heard the stories about Cole's son, about the argument that had sent the boy away and the silence that had lasted 2 decades. In a small frontier town, stories like that didn't stay buried. They became part of a man's reputation, something people knew about you, even if they never spoke of it to your face. Cole's story had started out promising enough. He'd come to Montana at 22 with nothing but a strong back and a head full of ambition. He'd worked other men's ranches for 5 years, learning everything he could, saving every penny. When he met Anna Bridgewater at a church social in town, he'd known within a month that he wanted to marry her. She was a schoolteacher's daughter with a practical mind and a warm laugh that made even hard days feel manageable. They were married within the year. Cole bought his first 100 acres with his savings and a loan from the Territorial Bank. Anna taught school for 3 more years, while Cole built their herd and their home. When Jacob was born, she'd finally stopped teaching to raise their son, though she never stopped being a teacher at heart. She'd filled their home with books and made sure Jacob learned to read before he was 5. Those early years had been good ones. Hard, certainly. Every rancher's life was hard, but good in the way that mattered. They'd grown the ranch slowly, deliberately, never overextending themselves the way some of their neighbors did. By the time Jacob was 10, they owned 1,500 acres and ran 500 head of cattle. By the time he was 15, they'd doubled both numbers. Cole had assumed Jacob would want the ranch someday. It seemed natural. A father builds something and passes it to his son. But Jacob had other ideas. He was a bright boy, always reading, always asking questions about things that had nothing to do with cattle or grass or the price of beef. Anna had encouraged it, had ordered books from back east for him, had talked about colleges and opportunities. Cole hadn't understood it then. He'd seen it as Anna filling the boy's head with notions that would take him away from what really mattered. They'd argued about it, though never in front of Jacob. Anna had tried to make him see that wanting something different didn't mean Jacob was rejecting what Cole had built. But Cole had been too stubborn to listen, too certain that his way was the right way. The argument that finally broke them came when Jacob was 18. He'd been accepted to study law at a university back east, a full scholarship based on his marks, and a letter of recommendation from the territorial judge. Anna had been so proud she'd cried. Jacob had been nervous but excited, talking about coming back someday to practice law in Montana, to use his education to help the territory become a state. Cole had said no. He'd needed Jacob on the ranch. They were expanding again, buying up adjacent land from a neighbor who was moving back east. It was the opportunity Cole had been waiting for, the chance to build something truly substantial, something that would last generations. He'd needed his son beside him to make it work. Jacob had argued that they could hire help, that Cole could bring on another foreman. Cole had refused. This was family land, family work. You didn't hire strangers to build your legacy. He'd given Jacob an ultimatum: stay and work the ranch, or leave and don't expect any help from home. Anna had begged Cole to reconsider. She'd told him he was making a terrible mistake, that he was going to lose their son over pride. Cole had been certain Jacob would come around, would see sense, would choose family over some foolish dream about books and courtrooms. Jacob had left on a Tuesday morning in late summer. He'd packed one bag, taken the pocket watch Cole's father had given him, and caught the morning stage to the train depot. Cole had watched him go from this same porch, too proud to call him back, too angry to say goodbye. Anna had cried for days. She'd written letters to Jacob every week. She'd begged Cole to write too, to apologize, to reach out. Cole had refused. The letters from Jacob had come regularly at first, once a week, then once a month. They were addressed to Anna, never to Cole. They talked about his studies, about the city, about how different everything was back east. Anna had read parts of them aloud at dinner, trying to keep Jacob present in their home, even when he was 1,000 miles away. Cole had listened in silence, his jaw tight, saying nothing. After a year, the letters became less frequent. After 2 years, they came only on holidays. After Anna died, they stopped coming at all. Cole had written to inform Jacob of his mother's death. He'd kept the letter short and factual. Anna had fallen ill, had passed within a week, had been buried in the churchyard beside the plot Cole had already purchased for himself. He'd given the date of the funeral. He hadn't asked Jacob to come, hadn't said he wanted him there. He'd simply provided the information, as if reporting the weather. Jacob hadn't come to the funeral, or so Cole had thought at the time. He'd stood beside the grave with half the town in attendance, had accepted their condolences with a wooden face, had returned to the empty ranch house alone. He'd told himself he didn't blame the boy for staying away. He'd told himself it was probably for the best. He'd told himself a lot of things that weren't quite true. In the years since, Cole had continued to build the ranch. He'd acquired more land, expanded his herd, increased his holdings. On paper, he was one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. People respected him. They sought his advice on livestock and land management. When the territorial legislature needed someone to testify about grazing rights, they'd called on Cole Merritt. But success hadn't filled the silence in his house. It hadn't given him anyone to pass the ranch to. It hadn't made him feel any less alone when he stood on this porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land that would belong to strangers when he died. The town of Benton Creek sat 5 miles south of Cole's ranch, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a single main street. It had started as a trading post 40 years ago, and had grown into something more substantial as ranchers and farmers settled the valley. There was a general store, a church, a saloon, a telegraph office, and a dozen other businesses that served the surrounding community. Cole went to town once a week for supplies and to check if any correspondence had arrived. He knew everyone by name and they knew him. They nodded politely when he passed. Some of the older folks still asked about Jacob, though. Most had learned not to. Cole appreciated their discretion, even if he knew they talked about him once he'd left. It was on one of these weekly trips that Cole had first noticed Miriam Hayes. She'd been standing outside the general store, studying a map and frowning at it like it had personally offended her. She wore practical traveling clothes, sturdy boots, a split skirt for riding, a jacket with deep pockets. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, streaked with grey, that she'd made no effort to hide. She carried herself like someone who didn't need anyone's help, but wouldn't refuse it if offered properly. Cole had learned from the store owner that she was passing through, that she'd been staying at the boarding house for a few days while she resupplied. She'd come down from the mountains, where she'd been living alone for the past several months. Before that, she'd been working as a cook at a lumber camp. Before that, a school teacher in a mining town that had mostly emptied out when the ore ran dry. She was a wanderer, the store owner had explained. Her husband had died 5 years back, timber accident up north, and she'd never settled down again. She'd move into a place for a few months, work whatever job was available, then pack up and move on. Some folks thought it strange for a woman her age to be living like that, but she seemed content enough with it. Cole had filed the information away without thinking much about it. Plenty of people passed through Benton Creek on their way to somewhere else. He'd nodded politely when he'd passed her on the street, had held the door for her at the general store, had otherwise paid her no mind. That had been 3 weeks ago. He hadn't expected to see her again. He certainly hadn't expected that she would become part of the most desperate plan he'd ever conceived. The ranch house held reminders of Jacob in every corner, if Cole let himself look. The boys' room upstairs remained exactly as he'd left it. Books on the shelves, clothes still hanging in the wardrobe, the bed made with military precision the way Jacob had always preferred. Cole had gone in there once after Anna died, had stood in the doorway, looking at the preserved childhood of a son who was now a man he'd never met. He'd closed the door and hadn't opened it since. The leather ledger where Cole kept the ranch accounts sat on his desk in the study. Every transaction, every head of cattle, every dollar earned and spent was recorded in his precise handwriting. The ledger went back 25 years, a complete history of everything he'd built. Future volumes sat empty on the shelf, waiting for entries that might never matter to anyone. He'd built something impressive. He knew that. But he'd also known, in the quiet moments when he couldn't lie to himself, that he'd traded his family for it. He'd chosen the ranch over his son, had chosen pride over love, had chosen to be right over being happy. Anna had known it too, had tried to tell him, had died, probably still hoping he'd change his mind and reach out to Jacob before it was too late. Now, at 54 years old, Cole Merritt stood on his porch and wondered if maybe it already was too late, if maybe some mistakes couldn't be fixed, no matter how much you wanted to fix them, if maybe he'd have to live with the consequences of his choices until the day they buried him next to Anna in the churchyard. The evening wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and grass. Somewhere down by the barn, one of the hands was singing while he worked. The cattle were settling for the night. The mountains to the west were turning purple in the fading light. It was beautiful country. Cole had always thought so. But beauty didn't keep you warm at night. It didn't give you anyone to talk to. It didn't make the silence in a big house any less empty. He finished his coffee, cold now as usual, and went inside to heat up the stew he'd made 2 days ago. He'd eat alone at the kitchen table, would wash his own dishes, would eventually go upstairs to sleep in a bed that still felt too large even after 7 years. Tomorrow he'd do it all again, and the day after that, it was a life. Maybe not the one he'd imagined when he was young and ambitious and certain he could have everything he wanted. But it was his life, and he'd made it exactly what it was through his own choices. He just hadn't expected it to feel quite so much like a sentence. The letter arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, handed to Cole by the postmaster, with a look that suggested he'd already read it and knew what it contained. In a town the size of Benton Creek, privacy was more of a polite fiction than an actual practice. Cole took the envelope and recognized the handwriting immediately, even though he hadn't seen it in 20 years. He didn't open it right away. He stood on the boardwalk outside the post office, holding the envelope in hands that had suddenly gone cold despite the warm spring air. Other people passed by, greeting him, going about their business. Cole nodded to them automatically while staring at his name written in Jacob's careful script. Finally, he walked to the bench outside the general store and sat down. His fingers trembled slightly as he broke the seal and unfolded the single page inside. The letter was brief, almost businesslike in its tone. "Father," it began, not "Dear Father," just "Father," as if even that small warmth was too much to offer. "I am writing to inform you that I will be visiting Benton Creek on May 15th. I'm engaged to be married to Miss Sophie Grant of Philadelphia, and she has expressed interest in seeing where I grew up. We will be staying at the boarding house for 3 days. I thought it appropriate to let you know of our arrival in advance. Jacob." Cole read it 3 times, looking for something between the lines that wasn't there. No mention of reconciliation. No expression of desire to reconnect. Just a formal notification, the kind you might send to a business acquaintance. The date was 10 days away. He folded the letter carefully and put it back in his pocket. His chest felt tight, his breathing shallow. This was what he'd wanted, wasn't it? Jacob coming home, even if only for a visit. A chance to see his son after 20 years. A chance to meet the woman Jacob had chosen to marry. It should have felt like good news. Instead, it felt like judgment arriving with an appointment time. Cole walked back to where he'd tied his horse and rode home slowly, the letter burning like a coal in his pocket. He kept replaying the words in his head, kept hearing the coldness in that single word, father. Not pa or dad, the way Jacob had called him as a boy. Just father, formal and distant as a stranger. That evening, Cole sat at his desk and tried to write a response. He went through 6 sheets of paper before giving up. Everything he wrote sounded either too eager or too cold, too apologetic or too proud. How did you respond to a son who'd been gone for 20 years? How did you say you were glad he was coming when the letter made it clear he was only coming out of obligation? Finally, he wrote simply, "Jacob, I received your letter. I look forward to seeing you and meeting Miss Grant. The house is available if you prefer not to stay at the boarding house. Cole." He signed it with his first name, not father, matching Jacob's formality with his own. He mailed the letter the next morning and heard nothing back. The silence felt familiar. The days that followed were difficult. Cole found himself unable to focus on work. He'd start tasks and forget what he was doing halfway through. Hank noticed and began quietly redirecting him to simpler jobs, the kind that didn't require much thinking. The other hands noticed too, though they had the grace not to say anything. Cole spent his evenings sitting in the study, staring at nothing, trying to figure out what he could possibly say to Jacob that would bridge 2 decades of silence. He'd rehearse conversations in his head, but they all fell apart within a few sentences. How did you apologize for losing 20 years? How did you explain that you'd been too proud and too stubborn and too stupid to reach out, even when you'd wanted to? On the 5th day after receiving Jacob's letter, Cole rode into town for supplies and saw Miriam Hayes again. She was loading her pack with goods from the general store, preparing to head back into the mountains. She worked efficiently, checking each item before securing it, the movements of someone who'd done this many times before. Cole tied up his horse and went into the store. He gathered the items he needed without really thinking about them. Coffee, flour, sugar, bacon. His mind was elsewhere, turning over the problem of Jacob's visit like a man worrying a sore tooth. "That'll be $4.30, the store owner said. And Cole paid, without haggling over prices he normally would have questioned. "You all right, Cole?" the owner asked, counting out change. "You seem distracted." "I'm fine," Cole said automatically. Then, because the man had known him for 15 years and would hear about it anyway, he added, My son's coming to visit. First time in 20 years. The store owner's eyebrows went up. Jacob's coming home? That's wonderful news. He's bringing his fiancée, Cole said. Staying at the boarding house. The emphasis on those last words wasn't lost on the store owner. Staying at the boarding house instead of at his father's ranch. The distance was built right into the visit. Well, the store owner said carefully, maybe this is a chance to mend some fences. Cole nodded and gathered his supplies. On his way out, he nearly ran into Miriam Hayes, coming back in for one more item. They both stopped short, and Cole automatically moved aside to let her pass. "Pardon me, ma'am," he said. She nodded to him. "No harm done." Her voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that didn't waste words. Cole went outside and began loading his supplies onto his horse. But his mind was racing now, turning over an idea that was either brilliant or insane. Probably insane. Almost certainly insane. But desperate times called for desperate measures. And if Cole Merritt was anything right now, he was desperate. Jacob was bringing his fiancée to show her where he grew up. Jacob was staying at the boarding house because his father was a lonely widower in a house full of ghosts. What if Jacob didn't find a lonely widower? What if he found a father who'd moved on, who'd found happiness again, who'd built a new life? It was a terrible idea. It was dishonest. It went against everything Cole believed about straightforward dealing and honest living. It was also, possibly, the only chance he had to show Jacob that he wasn't the same stubborn, prideful man who'd driven him away 20 years ago. Cole turned and looked back at the general store. Through the window, he could see Miriam Hayes paying for her purchase. She was leaving town, heading back to a solitary life in the mountains. She had no connections here, no ties that would make a temporary arrangement complicated. She was respectable, intelligent, clearly capable of taking care of herself, and there was something in her eyes that Cole recognized, the same loneliness he saw in his own reflection. Before he could talk himself out of it, Cole tied his horse back up and went into the store. Miriam was just leaving, her pack now fully loaded. Cole held the door for her, then followed her outside. "Miss Hayes," he said, "might I have a word with you?" She stopped and turned, studying him with the kind of direct gaze that made lesser men uncomfortable. "Mr. Merritt," she said, "something I can help you with?" Cole glanced around. Several people were within earshot, going about their business, but certainly close enough to hear. "Perhaps we could speak more privately." One of her eyebrows went up slightly, but she nodded. They walked to the end of the boardwalk, far enough from other folks to have a conversation without being overheard. Cole took off his hat and turned it in his hands, suddenly feeling like a foolish old man with a foolish idea. But he'd come this far, and backing out now would just make him look even more foolish. "Miss Hayes," he began, then stopped. "How did you even ask something like this? I understand you're planning to head back into the mountains." "That's right," she said, "leaving first thing tomorrow." "I have a proposition for you," Cole said. "I know how this is going to sound, and I want you to know I'm not, that is, this isn't." He stopped and took a breath. "My son is coming to visit in 5 days. First time in 20 years, he's bringing his fiancée, and I need them to think I've remarried." Miriam's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Interest, maybe, or at least curiosity. "You need them to think you've remarried," she repeated. "Why would you need that?" "Because my son left, because I was a stubborn, prideful fool who put work ahead of family," Cole said bluntly. "And I'm still alone in that same house, still working that same ranch, still exactly the kind of man he'd have every reason to think hasn't changed at all. But if he sees that I've moved on, that I've found happiness again, that I've let someone else into my life, maybe—" He stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. "Maybe he'll think you've changed," Miriam finished for him. "Maybe he'll give me a chance to prove it," Cole said. Miriam studied him for a long moment. "You want me to pretend to be your wife?" "For 3 days," Cole said. "That's how long he's staying. You'd stay at the ranch, we'd act like a married couple, and when they leave, you'd be free to go back to your life. I'd pay you well for your time." "How well?" Cole pulled a gold coin from his pocket. A double eagle, $20, more than most people in Benton Creek saw in a month. He held it out to her. Miriam looked at the coin but didn't take it. "And what happens when your son finds out the truth?" "He won't," Cole said. "Not from me, anyway. And after he leaves, it doesn't matter. You'll be gone. I'll tell people we decided it wasn't working out, and that'll be the end of it." "You'd lie to your son to get him to talk to you," Miriam said. "It wasn't a question. I'd do just about anything to get him to talk to me," Cole admitted. "This might be my only chance." Miriam turned away and looked out at the street, at the mountains beyond, at the life she'd built around not staying anywhere too long. Cole waited, the gold coin still in his outstretched hand. Finally, she turned back to him. "No," she said simply. "I'm sorry for your situation, Mr. Merritt, but I won't be part of a lie like that." She adjusted her pack and started to walk away. Cole stood there, feeling something close to panic rising in his chest. This was it, his one idea, his one desperate plan, walking away from him just like everyone else had. "Please," he said, and the word came out rougher than he'd intended. "I know I don't have any right to ask. I know it's wrong. But Miss Hayes, I haven't seen my son in 20 years. 20 years. And he's only coming now because his fiancée wanted to see where he grew up. He's staying at the boarding house instead of with me. That's how bad things are between us. And I don't—" His voice cracked slightly. "I don't know if I'll ever get another chance after this one." Miriam stopped walking. She didn't turn around, but she stopped. 3 days, Cole continued. Just 3 days of pretending. You'd have your own room, your own space. I'd treat you with complete respect, and when it's over, you'd have enough money to live comfortably for months. All I'm asking for is a chance to show my son that I'm not the same man I was." The silence stretched out. People passed by on the street, going about their business, unaware that Cole's entire future was balanced on whatever this woman decided in the next few moments. Finally, Miriam turned around. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Cole had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing right through to all the desperate, frightened parts he usually kept hidden. "1 gold coin, 3 days, and then I leave," she said. "No questions asked, no attempts to make me stay longer. We tell this lie of yours, your son visits, and then it's done." "Agreed?" Cole nodded, relief flooding through him so strongly he felt lightheaded. "Agreed." Miriam walked back and took the gold coin from his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then put it in her pocket. "I must be out of my mind," she said quietly. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow," Cole said. "I'll send someone with a wagon to bring you and your things to the ranch. We'll have 5 days to prepare before Jacob arrives." 5 days to build a believable marriage, Miriam said. "That ought to be interesting." She held out her hand, and Cole shook it, sealing the strangest bargain he'd ever made. As her hand clasped his, he felt both relief and a growing sense that he'd just set something in motion that he might not be able to control. But it was too late to back out now. Jacob was coming home, and Cole Merritt was going to be ready for him, even if that readiness was built on a foundation of lies and desperate hope. Miriam arrived at the ranch the next morning in a wagon driven by Hank, who'd been given the task without being told exactly why the boss was suddenly bringing a woman to live at the house. Hank was too smart not to have questions, but also too loyal to ask them. He helped Miriam down from the wagon, carried her 2 bags to the porch, tipped his hat politely, and left without a word. Cole watched from the doorway, suddenly aware of how long it had been since a woman had entered this house. 7 years since Anna died. Before that, the occasional visit from neighbors' wives, but no one who stayed, no one who belonged here. The house had been his and Anna's, then his alone. Now he was inviting a stranger in to pretend it was hers too. "I've prepared the guest room for you," Cole said, picking up her bags. "It's upstairs, overlooks the south pasture. Anna always said it got the best light in the mornings." Miriam followed him inside, her eyes taking in everything with the quick assessment of someone used to evaluating new situations. The house was clean, but clearly inhabited by a man alone. Functional rather than comfortable, maintained rather than lived in. Cole led her upstairs to the guest room. It was a decent-sized space with a bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a chair by the window. The quilt on the bed was one of Anna's, and Cole had to push away the guilt that came with offering it to someone else. "This is fine," Miriam said, setting her bag on the bed. "Where's your room?" Cole gestured down the hall. "End of the hallway. And Jacob's old room is across from this one. I haven't opened it in years, but I suppose we should—" He stopped, realizing how much needed to be done. "We should make it look lived in again. Natural, like a son's room that's still part of the house." "We should make the whole house look lived in," Miriam said, turning to face him. "If we're supposed to be married, there should be signs of me everywhere, not just in a guest room. Women leave traces, personal items, habits, small changes. If your son knew this house growing up, he'll notice if nothing's different except a woman sitting at the table." Cole nodded slowly. He hadn't thought that far ahead. "You're right. What do you suggest?" "Show me the house," Miriam said. "All of it. Then we'll figure out what needs to change." They spent the next hour walking through rooms Cole had lived in for 20 years. Miriam asked questions, not nosy ones, but practical ones. Which rooms had Anna spent the most time in? What had she changed when she lived here? What would Jacob remember? In the kitchen, Miriam paused at the herbs still hanging from the rafters. "These are dried out," she said. "Dead. Your wife hung these?" 7 years ago, Cole admitted. "They need to come down," Miriam said gently. "We can hang fresh ones if you want, but these are a memorial, not a life. Your son will see that." Cole felt something twist in his chest, but he nodded. "You're right." In the parlor, Miriam noticed the photographs on the mantel. All of them old, all of them showing Anna or young Jacob or both. "None recent." "We need new photographs here," she said. "Or at least we need to explain why there aren't any. Did you and Anna take photographs together?" "A few," Cole said. "They're in the study." They went to the study, where Cole kept his ledgers and business papers. Miriam looked around the room and immediately understood what it represented. The work that had consumed him, the success that had cost him his family. She didn't say anything, but Cole could see it in her face. He pulled out the photographs from a drawer. There were half a dozen of them, formal portraits taken in town over the years. Anna and Cole on their wedding day. Anna holding baby Jacob, the three of them when Jacob was 10. The images captured moments that felt impossibly distant now. "Which one is the most recent?" Miriam asked. Cole handed her the photograph of the three of them. Jacob was 10 years old, standing between his parents, Anna's hand on his shoulder. They all looked happy. Cole couldn't remember what year it had been taken, but he remembered it had been before things started falling apart. "We'll put this back on the mantel," Miriam said. "But we need something to explain the gap. Some reason why there aren't newer ones of us together." "We could say you don't like having your photograph taken," Cole suggested. "That works," Miriam agreed. "Simple explanations are usually the best." They continued through the house. Miriam noted what needed to change and what could stay. By the time they finished, Cole had a list of tasks that felt overwhelming, but Miriam tackled them methodically. And together they began transforming the house from a memorial into something that looked like a home again. They took down the dried herbs and the older curtains that were starting to fray. They moved some of Anna's more personal items, her sewing basket, her favorite shawl, into storage in the attic. They rearranged the furniture slightly in the parlor and kitchen, small changes that wouldn't be jarring, but would signal that someone new lived here now. By late afternoon, they were both tired and covered in dust. Miriam had rolled up her sleeves and tied back her hair, and Cole was reminded that she'd been living rough in the mountains for months. She wasn't afraid of work, wasn't precious about getting dirty. He appreciated that. "We should talk about our story," Miriam said as they sat on the porch with water from the well. "How we met, how long we've been married, what brought us together." "Your son will ask questions," Cole nodded. He'd been dreading this conversation. "What sounds believable?" "Something close to the truth is always easiest to remember," Miriam said. "We met in town. I was passing through, and we struck up a conversation. You mentioned needing help around the ranch. I needed work. One thing led to another. How long ago?" Cole asked. 6 months, Miriam said. Long enough to be serious, but not so long that people in town would have been expecting a wedding they never heard about. We got married quietly, just us and the preacher. We're private people. We don't make a show of our personal business. Cole considered this. It had the virtue of being simple and explaining why the town might not know much about their relationship. What about before? Your life before coming here? I'll keep it close to true, Miriam said. I was a schoolteacher. My husband died 5 years ago. I spent time wandering, working different jobs, trying to figure out what to do with myself. Then I came here and met you. And me. Cole asked, "What's my story?" "You were lonely," Miriam said, and there was no judgment in her voice, just simple fact. "You'd been alone since your wife died. You weren't looking for anyone, but then we met and something clicked. We're both old enough to know what we want, so we didn't waste time pretending otherwise. It was a good story, a believable story, the kind of story that happened to real people all the time." Cole just wished it didn't feel quite so close to something he actually wanted. "There's one more thing," Cole said, pulling his late wife's wedding ring from his pocket. He'd carried it with him since Anna died, unable to put it away but unable to wear it either. "You'll need to wear this." It was Anna's. Miriam looked at the simple gold band, and for the first time since arriving, Cole saw genuine hesitation on her face. "Mr. Merritt," "Cole," he interrupted. "If we're supposed to be married, you should call me Cole." "Cole," she said slowly, testing the name. "Are you sure about this?" "Your wife's ring, Anna's been gone 7 years, Cole said, though the words felt heavy. She'd understand. She always was practical about these things, and it has to look real, doesn't it? Miriam took the ring carefully, holding it like something precious and fragile. "What was she like?" "Your wife." Cole was quiet for a moment, memories flooding back. "She was kind, patient, especially with Jacob. She loved books and learning. She used to say that a mind was like a garden. You had to tend it, or it would go to weeds. She made this house feel like a home, not just a place to sleep between work." He paused. "She tried to make me understand about Jacob. I didn't listen." "Do you think she'd approve of this?" Miriam asked, gesturing at the ring, at the arrangement between them. "Of what we're doing?" Cole thought about it honestly. "I think she'd tell me I was being a fool, but I also think she'd understand why. She wanted Jacob and me to reconcile more than anything. If this is what it takes—" He didn't finish the sentence. Miriam slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit reasonably well, maybe slightly loose, but not enough to slide off. She looked at it for a long moment, then up at Cole. "I'll wear it with respect," she said quietly, "for what it meant to her and for what you're hoping it means now." "Thank you," Cole said. And meant it. They spent the rest of the evening working on their story, rehearsing answers to questions Jacob might ask. It felt awkward and artificial, two strangers trying to sound like a married couple. They stumbled over details, contradicted each other, had to start over multiple times. "How did I propose?" Cole asked at one point. Miriam laughed, the first time he'd heard her laugh, and it was a good sound, warm and genuine. "I don't know." "How did you propose to Anna?" "Badly," Cole admitted. "I got tongue-tied and rambled about practical considerations like she was a business investment. She said yes anyway, probably out of pity. Then you proposed to me the same way," Miriam said, still smiling. "Some men never change their methods. I said yes because I liked your honesty and because I was tired of being alone. It was closer to the truth than Cole was comfortable with, but he nodded. "That works." As the sun set, they made dinner together. Miriam cooked while Cole set the table, and it felt strange to have another person moving through the kitchen, using the stove, opening cupboards to find what she needed. They ate in the dining room, sitting across from each other, the conversation stilted at first, but gradually becoming easier. "You're a good cook," Cole said. "I've had practice," Miriam replied. "Cooking for lumber crews teaches you efficiency. This is easier, just 2 people. You miss it?" Cole asked. "The wandering, the different places?" Miriam considered the question. "Sometimes. There's freedom in not being tied down, but there's loneliness in it too. You wake up in places where nobody knows your name, where you don't matter to anyone. That gets old after a while. Is that why you agreed to this?" Cole asked. "The money." Partly, Miriam admitted, but also, she paused, choosing her words. I recognized something in you when you asked me. You had the same look I see in the mirror sometimes, like you're tired of carrying everything alone, but don't know how to ask for help. Cole felt exposed by her honesty, but also understood. You saw right through me. We see clearly in others what we know in ourselves, Miriam said. They cleaned up together, falling into an easy rhythm of washing and drying dishes. It was domestic and ordinary, and Cole realized how much he'd missed this. The simple companionship of sharing space with someone, of not being alone with his thoughts every evening. When they finished, Miriam excused herself to bed. She was tired from the day's work and the journey before it. Cole walked her to the stairs, then stood in the empty parlor listening to her footsteps overhead, to the sound of her door closing. The house felt different, not just because things had been moved or changed, but because there was life in it again. Someone else breathing in these rooms, someone else existing in this space he'd occupied alone for so long. Cole sat in his chair and tried to read, but couldn't focus. His mind kept returning to the ring on Miriam's finger, to the lies they were building, to the desperate hope that Jacob would come home and see a father who'd changed. He thought about Anna, about what she would say if she could see him now. She'd probably shake her head at his foolishness, but she might also understand. She'd always understood him better than he understood himself. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 9. 4 more days until Jacob arrived. 4 more days to make this believable, to transform a business arrangement into something that looked like a marriage, to hope that his son would see what Cole wanted him to see rather than the desperate lie underneath. Cole finally gave up on reading and went upstairs. As he passed Miriam's door, he could see a thin line of lamplight underneath. She was still awake, probably thinking her own thoughts about the strange situation she'd agreed to. He went to his room and closed the door. The bed was the same as always, but somehow the house felt less empty tonight. It was a small comfort, probably false comfort, built on lies and gold coins and desperate measures, but it was something. And right now, something was more than Cole had allowed himself to hope for in a very long time. The next morning, Cole woke to the smell of coffee brewing, something he hadn't experienced in 7 years. For a disorienting moment, he thought he'd dreamed the last several years, that Anna was downstairs making breakfast like she used to. Then memory reasserted itself and he remembered Miriam, the arrangement, the lies they were building. He dressed and went downstairs to find Miriam already in the kitchen, eggs frying in the pan, bread toasting on the stove. She'd found Anna's apron hanging on a peg and put it on, and the sight of it stopped Cole in the doorway. Miriam noticed him and glanced down at the apron. I'm sorry. I should have asked. I can take it off. No, Cole said quickly. It's fine. It should be used. That's what Anna would have wanted. He poured himself coffee and sat at the table. You didn't have to make breakfast. We're supposed to be married, Miriam said. Married people eat together. Besides, I was awake and hungry. Seemed practical. They ate in companionable silence, and Cole found himself relaxing slightly. This part, at least, wasn't entirely pretense. They were 2 people sharing a meal, and that was real enough. After breakfast, Cole suggested they tackle Jacob's room. It was a task he'd been avoiding for years, and he needed Miriam there for courage as much as for help. They climbed the stairs together, and Cole stood outside the closed door, his hand on the knob. It's been 20 years, he said. Since anyone's been in there? Then it's time, Miriam said gently. Cole opened the door. Dust motes danced in the morning light streaming through the window. Everything was exactly as Jacob had left it. Books on the shelves, clothes in the wardrobe, the bed made with military precision. It was a museum to a boy who no longer existed, preserved by a father who couldn't let go. Miriam walked in slowly, taking in the room. She went to the bookshelf and read the titles: adventure novels, history books, a collection of law journals that Jacob must have acquired before he left. On the desk sat an inkwell and a stack of paper, ready for letters that were never written. He loved to read, Cole said, standing in the doorway. Anna used to order books for him from back east. He'd tear through them in a week, then beg for more. Miriam opened the wardrobe and found shirts that would be far too small for the man Jacob had become. She pulled out a jacket and held it up. "This won't fit him anymore." "I know," Cole said. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of his things. It felt like erasing him." "It's not erasing him to acknowledge he grew up," Miriam said. She laid the jacket on the bed. "But we need to be practical. If Jacob sees this room exactly as he left it, frozen in time, what will he think?" "That I never moved on," Cole said quietly. "That I've been living in the past." "Exactly." Miriam turned to face him. "We need to update this room. Not erase Jacob from it, but show that you've accepted he's not that boy anymore. Keep some things, the books, maybe a few personal items. But the clothes that don't fit, the childish things, those need to go." Cole nodded, though his chest felt tight. They spent the next hour sorting through Jacob's belongings. Some things they kept, the books, a carved wooden horse Cole had made for Jacob's 8th birthday, a framed map of Montana territory that had hung over the desk. Other things they packed away, clothes, old school papers, toys from childhood. In the desk drawer, Miriam found something that made her pause. She pulled out a pocket watch. The glass face cracked. The hand stopped at exactly 3:17. She held it up. "This is broken." Cole went still. He hadn't seen that watch in 20 years, hadn't known Jacob had left it behind. "That was my father's watch," he said quietly. "I gave it to Jacob when he turned 16. Who told him it had been in the family for 2 generations, and he'd pass it to his son someday. What happened to it?" Cole took the watch from her hand and turned it over. The case was dented where it had struck something hard. "The day Jacob left, we had an argument, the worst one. He told me he was going east to study law, whether I approved or not. I told him if he'd left, he wasn't my son anymore. He threw the watch at me. I didn't duck fast enough. It hit the wall behind me and fell to the floor. When I picked it up, it had stopped." He looked at the frozen hands. 3:17 in the afternoon? "That's the exact time my son stopped being part of my life." Miriam's face showed genuine sadness. "Did you mean it?" "What you said to him." "No," Cole said, his voice rough. "I was angry and proud and stupid. I thought if I pushed hard enough, he'd back down, choose the ranch, choose me. Instead, he chose himself. Which is exactly what he should have done, and I was too pig-headed to see it. Have you ever told him that?" "I've never told him anything," Cole admitted. "After Anna died, I wrote to tell him. Short letter, just the facts. He didn't come to the funeral, or I thought he didn't. I've written other letters over the years, but I never sent them. They're all still in my desk drawer." Miriam set the watch carefully on the dresser. "Why didn't you send them?" "Pride. Fear, the certainty that too much time had passed, that he'd moved on with his life and didn't want to hear from me." Cole sank into the chair by the window. "Every year it got harder to reach out. Every year the silence got louder. After a while, it seemed easier to just accept that I'd lost him. But you haven't accepted it," Miriam said. "That's why we're here, doing this. That's why you're willing to lie to your son's face if it means getting him to stay for 3 days. Cole looked up at her. "You think I'm pathetic?" "I think you're human," Miriam said. "I think you made mistakes and you're trying to fix them the only way you know how. I don't know if it's the right way, but I understand it." She paused. "My husband died suddenly. Timber accident. A tree fell wrong and he was in the wrong place. I never got to tell him goodbye. Never got to say all the things I should have said when I had the chance. You have a chance, Cole. Your son is alive. He's coming here. Maybe the way you're going about it isn't perfect, but at least you're trying." Cole felt something break loose in his chest, grief maybe, or relief at finally having someone understand. "What would you have said to your husband if you'd had the chance?" Miriam was quiet for a long moment. "That I loved him. That I was grateful for the life we built together, even though it was too short. That I was sorry for all the small resentments and petty arguments that didn't matter in the end." She smiled sadly. "And I'd have asked him what I'm supposed to do now. How I'm supposed to keep living when he's not here to share it with. What did you decide?" "I decided to keep moving," Miriam said. "If I didn't stay in one place too long, I didn't have to feel the permanence of his absence. I could pretend I was just traveling, and eventually I'd go home and he'd be there." She shook her head. "But of course he never is. And after 5 years, I'm tired of pretending." They sat together in Jacob's room, two people who'd lost too much and were trying to figure out how to live with the gaps that loss had left. The broken pocket watch sat on the dresser, its hands frozen at 3:17, marking the moment when Cole's life had fractured. "We should fix this room properly," Miriam said eventually. "Make it look like a son's room that's still part of his father's house, but updated for a man instead of a boy. New curtains maybe, fresh linens on the bed. Keep the meaningful things, but show that time has passed." Cole nodded. They spent the rest of the morning working on the room, making small changes that signaled acceptance rather than abandonment. They took down the old curtains and replaced them with new ones from the linen closet. They made up the bed with fresh sheets. They arranged the books more deliberately, displaying the law journals prominently to show Cole's pride in Jacob's chosen profession. When they finished, the room looked lived in but not frozen. It was a room that said, "This belongs to a man I respect, even if I don't see him often." It was exactly what Cole needed it to say. That afternoon, Hank came up to the house with a question about buying new breeding stock. He found Cole and Miriam on the porch, and Cole introduced them properly for the first time. "Hank, this is Miriam. My wife." Hank's weathered face showed only polite surprise. "Ma'am, pleasure to meet you officially. I have to say, the boss kept this quiet. We're private people," Miriam said, using their rehearsed explanation. "No need to make a fuss." Hank nodded, accepting this. He discussed the breeding stock with Cole for a few minutes, but his eyes kept drifting to Miriam, clearly curious about this woman who'd appeared in Cole's life. When he left, Cole knew the news would spread through the ranch hands by evening and through town within a day. Their lie was becoming public now. There was no taking it back. That evening they sat together in the parlor after dinner. Cole was supposedly reading, but he couldn't focus on the words. Miriam was mending one of his shirts. She'd noticed the torn sleeve and insisted on fixing it, saying a wife would notice such things. 3 more days, Cole said. 3 more days. Miriam agreed. She bit off the thread and held up the shirt to inspect her work. "Are you ready?" "No," Cole admitted. "I don't think I'll ever be ready to see him again. But I'm out of time to prepare." Miriam set down the shirt and looked at him directly. "What's the worst that could happen?" "He sees through the lie, he gets angry, he leaves." "You're no worse off than you are now, except I'll have tried and failed," Cole said. "Right now I can tell myself there might still be a chance. After this you'll know," Miriam finished. "One way or another you'll know where you stand." That's worth something, Cole supposed it was. He just wasn't sure he was brave enough to face whatever truth Jacob brought with him. The broken pocket watch sat on the mantel now, positioned where Jacob would see it when he entered the house. Cole wasn't sure why he'd put it there, maybe as a reminder of what was broken, maybe as a hope that broken things could be repaired. 3 more days. Then his son would walk through that door, and Cole would find out if 20 years and a lie built on desperation could somehow lead to forgiveness. It didn't seem likely, but it was all he had. On the 3rd morning of their arrangement, Miriam found herself drawn to the kitchen earlier than usual. She'd been searching for something to occupy her restless hands when she discovered a wooden box tucked into the back of a cupboard. Inside were recipe cards, each one covered in careful handwriting. Anna's handwriting, she realized. Recognizing it from the family Bible she'd seen in the parlor, Miriam pulled out the cards one by one, reading through them. There were recipes for everyday meals, beef stew, cornbread, apple pie. But there were also notes in the margins, Jacob's favorite, or Cole likes extra pepper, or good for winter evenings. These weren't just recipes. They were a record of how Anna had cared for her family, the small ways she'd shown love through food and attention. Miriam felt like an intruder. This box, these cards, they were intimate in a way that made her uncomfortable. She was sitting in another woman's kitchen, wearing her ring, preparing to lie to her son. The weight of it pressed down on her shoulders. "You found Anna's recipes." Miriam turned to find Cole in the doorway, dressed for the day but moving slowly, as if the weight of what was coming had made him heavy. "I'm sorry," Miriam said. "I was looking for something to make for breakfast, and I found these." I shouldn't have—" "It's fine," Cole interrupted. He came into the kitchen and picked up one of the cards, a faint smile crossing his face. "Anna loved to cook. Said it was her way of taking care of us even when she couldn't be there. She'd make extra and pack it for Jacob to take to school, or for me to take when I had to ride out to check the fences." Miriam held up the card she'd been reading. "Pot roast. She notes that it's Jacob's favorite, that he always asked for it on his birthday." Cole took the card and read it. "He did, every year without fail, even when he was 17 and trying to act too grown up for such things. He'd still request Anna's pot roast." He set the card down carefully. "I haven't made it since she died. Haven't made most of these, actually. I just eat to keep going, not because I enjoy it. Would you want to?" Miriam asked. "Make pot roast for Jacob's visit? It might, I don't know, it might be a way to show him you remember, that you've held on to the good things." Cole considered this. "Would you help me? I was never much of a cook. Anna tried to teach me, but I was always too impatient, too focused on getting back to work." "Of course," Miriam said. They spent that morning going through Anna's recipe box together, planning meals for Jacob's visit. Cole told stories about each dish, where Anna had learned to make it, what occasions she'd served it, how Jacob had reacted. The stories came easier now, memories that Cole had kept locked away for years, spilling out in the safety of Miriam's patient listening. "She made this apple cake for our anniversary every year," Cole said, holding up a card. "Said it reminded her of the first dessert we shared after I proposed, though that was store-bought, not homemade. She always claimed hers was better, was it?" Miriam asked. "Miles better," Cole admitted. "Everything Anna made was good. She put care into it, made it mean something beyond just filling your belly." Miriam watched him as he spoke, saw the genuine affection in his face when he talked about his late wife. There was grief there, certainly, but also gratitude for the years they'd had together. It made her think of her own husband, of the meals they'd shared, of the ordinary moments that had seemed unremarkable until they became memories. "My husband couldn't cook to save his life," Miriam said. "Burned water once somehow. But he always sat with me while I cooked, telling me about his day, making me laugh. Said watching me cook was like watching magic. You put in separate things that didn't look like much, and somehow they became something worth eating." "You miss him," Cole said. "It wasn't a question. Every day," Miriam admitted, "but less sharply than I used to. Time doesn't heal exactly, but it does make the edges less raw. You learn to carry it differently." They were quiet for a moment, two people who understood loss in a way that needed no explanation. Then Miriam picked up the pot roast recipe. "Let's make this tonight. Practice for when Jacob comes. That way we'll know if we're doing it right." Cole agreed, and they went into town together to buy what they needed. It was Miriam's first time accompanying Cole publicly, and she was aware of the curious looks they received. The store owner greeted them with barely concealed interest, his eyes going to the ring on Miriam's finger. "Mrs. Merritt," he said, testing out the name. "Good to see you settling in. Cole treating you well?" "Very well," Miriam said, keeping her tone polite but not overly warm. They'd agreed to be courteous but private, not offering more information than necessary. As they shopped, other townspeople found reasons to pass by and say hello. News had spread as Cole had known it would. By now, everyone in Benton Creek knew that Cole Merritt had quietly married a woman none of them had met before. Some seemed genuinely happy for him. Others seemed skeptical, wondering about the timing. Jacob returning after 20 years, and suddenly his father had a wife? Cole handled the attention with patient dignity, neither confirming nor denying anything beyond the basics. Yes, he'd remarried, though they hadn't made a big announcement. They were private people. That was all anyone needed to know. On the ride back to the ranch, Miriam asked, "Does it bother you? The lying?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he finally said. "I was raised to be honest, to keep my word, to do right by people. This goes against everything I believe about how a man should conduct himself. Then why do it? Because being honest for the past 20 years got me nowhere," Cole said. "I was honest when I told Jacob he had to stay and work the ranch. I was honest when I told him I didn't approve of his plans. I was honest when I said he was making a mistake. And my honesty drove him away and kept him away." Maybe it's time to try something else, even if that something else is deception. Even then, Cole said, if it means getting 3 days with my son, I'll carry the guilt of it. I've carried worse. Back at the ranch, they prepared the pot roast together. Miriam read Anna's instructions, while Cole did the actual cooking, his hands clumsy at first, but gradually finding the rhythm. The kitchen filled with familiar smells, meat browning, vegetables simmering, herbs releasing their fragrance. This is how the house used to smell, Cole said quietly, when Anna was alive, when Jacob was still here. Coming home at the end of the day and smelling dinner cooking, it meant family. It meant belonging somewhere. Miriam stirred the pot and didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound hollow. Cole was mourning not just the people he'd lost, but the life he'd lost, the ordinary moments that had made a house feel like home. As the pot roast simmered, they sat at the kitchen table with coffee. Cole pulled out more of Anna's recipe cards and showed Miriam the notes his wife had made. Some were practical, cooking times, ingredient substitutions. Others were more personal, made this the day Jacob learned to ride by himself. He was so proud, or Cole's favorite when he's had a hard day. She documented your life together, Miriam observed. I suppose she did, Cole said. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. These cards are a history of our family, written in meals and margins. What would she think of this? Miriam asked, gesturing at the pot roast, at the two of them sitting together in her kitchen. Of what we're doing. Cole thought carefully before answering. Anna was practical. She'd see through the deception immediately. But I think, he paused, choosing his words, I think she'd also see that I'm trying, that after 7 years of being stuck, of living in the past, I'm at least attempting to move forward, even if I'm going about it wrong. She always said effort mattered as much as outcome. She sounds like she was wise. She was, Cole agreed. Much wiser than me. She knew that holding on too tight meant losing everything. I didn't learn that lesson until it was too late. The pot roast finished cooking just as the sun was setting. They set the table in the dining room, the good dishes, the cloth napkins Anna had embroidered, candles that hadn't been lit in years. It felt ceremonial, like a practice run for something important. When they sat down to eat, Cole served the pot roast onto their plates. He took a bite and closed his eyes. It tastes just like I remember, he said, his voice thick. Just like Anna used to make it. Miriam tasted her own portion. It was good. Tender meat, rich gravy, vegetables cooked perfectly. But more than that, it was made with care, with attention to someone else's recipe and someone else's memories. It was an act of love, even if that love was meant for someone else. They ate slowly, neither of them rushing. The candles flickered between them, casting shadows on the walls. Outside, the evening sounds of the ranch filtered through the windows. Cattle settling, horses in the barn, the distant call of a coyote. Thank you, Cole said eventually, for helping me make this. He gestured vaguely, encompassing more than just the meal. For all of it. You're welcome, Miriam said simply. After dinner, they cleaned up together, falling into the routine they'd developed over the past few days. It was comfortable now, this shared domesticity. They moved around each other easily in the kitchen, no longer awkward about who should wash and who should dry, where things belonged, how the other person liked things done. As Miriam hung up the dish towel, she caught sight of her reflection in the window, a woman in a frontier kitchen, wearing another woman's apron and ring, playing house with a man she barely knew. It should have felt wrong. Part of it did feel wrong, but another part felt like something she'd been missing without knowing it. The simple act of caring for someone else, of being part of a shared life, even if that life was built on pretense. 2 more days, Cole said, echoing her thoughts. 2 more days, Miriam agreed. Are you ready for him? Cole looked around the kitchen, at the recipe box still sitting on the counter, at the pot roast leftovers cooling in the pan. I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but at least now the house feels like a home again. That's something. It was something. Miriam just wasn't sure if it was enough to bridge 20 years of silence and hurt. But they'd find out soon. Jacob was coming, and whatever happened next would determine whether Cole's desperate gamble had been worth the cost. The day before Jacob's arrival, Cole brought Miriam to his study to show her something he'd kept hidden, even from himself, for years. The room was lined with books and ledgers, the walls covered in maps of the ranch's expanding territory. But Cole went to his desk and pulled open the bottom drawer, the one he never opened, the one that had stayed locked for 2 decades. Inside was a stack of letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Jacob but never sent. "I've been writing to him," Cole said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every time something happened that I thought he should know about. I write, but I can't bring myself to send them." Miriam picked up the top letter. The envelope was addressed in Cole's careful handwriting, "Jacob Merritt, care of the law school back east." The postmark was blank. It had never been mailed. She looked at Cole for permission, and he nodded. She opened it and read. It was a birthday letter from 3 years ago, written when Jacob would have been 35. Cole wrote about the ranch, about a particularly harsh winter, about a new foal born in early spring. But underneath the mundane details was a current of longing, of regret, of words that didn't know how to say "I'm sorry," but circled around it nonetheless. "You've been reaching out to him all along," Miriam said. "Just not in a way he could receive. What's the point of reaching out if you never actually make contact?" Cole asked bitterly. "These letters might as well not exist. They're just evidence of my cowardice." Miriam set down the letter and picked up another, then another. She saw the pattern, years of one-sided conversation, of a father talking to a son who never heard him. There were letters about Anna's death, about the expansion of the ranch, about town gossip and weather and the 1,000 small things that made up a life. And underneath it all, the unspoken message, "I miss you. I was wrong. Please come home. Why didn't you send them?" Miriam asked. Cole sank into his desk chair. Pride, mostly. The same pride that drove him away in the first place. "I kept thinking I should wait until I had the right words, until I could write something that would fix everything. But the right words never came, and the longer I waited, the harder it became. After a while, it felt like it was too late, that too much time had passed, that Jacob had built a life without me and wouldn't want to hear from a father who'd failed him so completely." Miriam sat down across from him. "You should give these to him. When he comes tomorrow, let him see that you've been thinking about him all along. They're evidence of 20 years of silence," Cole said. 20 years of being too afraid to reach out. What good does that do?" "They're evidence that you never stopped caring," Miriam countered. "That even when you couldn't find the courage to send them, you were still writing, still trying in your own way. That matters, Cole." He shook his head. "It's too much. Too heavy to put on him the moment he walks through the door. He's coming for 3 days to introduce me to his fiancée, not to sort through 2 decades of my failures." "Then when?" Miriam asked. "If not now, when will you tell him? When will you show him who you really are, instead of this carefully constructed version we've been building?" Cole had no answer for that. He carefully gathered the letters and put them back in the drawer, closing it with a finality that said the conversation was over. That afternoon, they went into town one last time before Jacob's arrival. Miriam needed a few personal items, and Cole wanted to check if there had been any further correspondence from his son. The streets of Benton Creek were busy with the usual afternoon activity. Ranchers picking up supplies, wives doing their shopping, children running between buildings. At the general store, they ran into Benjamin Cross, Cole's lawyer, and one of the few men in town Cole considered a true friend. Benjamin was in his early 60s, sharp-minded and direct in a way that came from decades of legal practice. "Cole," Benjamin said, then turned to Miriam with genuine warmth. "And this must be the mysterious Mrs. Merritt everyone's been talking about." "Benjamin, this is Miriam," Cole said. "Miriam, Benjamin Cross. He keeps me out of legal trouble." "Not always successfully," Benjamin said with a slight smile. He studied Miriam with the assessing gaze of a man used to reading people. "I heard you two got married. Quietly, I'm told. No announcement, no celebration. That's not like you, Cole. You're usually a man who does things properly." There was a question underneath the words, one that made Cole uncomfortable. Benjamin knew him too well, had known him for 30 years. If anyone in town was going to see through their arrangement, it would be Benjamin. We're private people, Miriam said, using their practiced explanation. No need for a fuss. Of course, Benjamin said, but his eyes remained thoughtful. Well, congratulations. I'm glad to see Cole's not rattling around that big house alone anymore. And I hear Jacob's coming to visit. That must be quite something after all these years. It is, Cole said shortly. I'd like to speak with you privately, if I may, Benjamin said to Cole. Just for a moment. Business matter, Cole glanced at Miriam, who nodded. I'll finish the shopping, she said. Take your time. The two men stepped outside onto the boardwalk, far enough from other people to speak without being overheard. Benjamin turned to Cole with a serious expression. What are you doing? Oh, Benjamin asked bluntly. I don't know what you mean, Cole said, though he knew exactly what Benjamin meant. Cole, I've known you for 30 years. I knew Anna, God rest her, and I know you well enough to know that you didn't just quietly marry a woman nobody in town has ever heard of, without there being more to the story. Benjamin's voice was gentle but firm. I'm not judging you, but I am concerned. Whatever you're planning with Jacob's visit, be careful. Deception has a way of causing more harm than the problem it's meant to solve. Cole looked at his friend and saw genuine worry there. Benjamin wasn't trying to interfere. He was trying to protect him. You think I'm making a mistake? I think you're desperate, Benjamin said. And desperate men make choices they wouldn't otherwise make. I understand why. Jacob's your son, and you've been estranged for 20 years. Of course you'd do anything to fix that. But Cole, whatever story you're telling him, whatever picture you're painting of your life now, it has to be sustainable. What happens when the truth comes out? The truth won't come out, Cole said. After Jacob leaves, Miriam will go back to her life. I'll tell people it didn't work out, and that'll be the end of it. And you think your son will just accept that? That he'll never ask questions, never want to visit again, never wonder about the woman who was briefly his stepmother? Benjamin shook his head. You're building a house of cards, my friend. And when it falls, and it will fall, you might lose more than you had to begin with. Cole wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Everything Benjamin was saying was true. The lie was fragile, the consequences potentially devastating. But he'd come too far to turn back now. I appreciate your concern, Cole said finally. But this is my choice to make, and my consequences to live with. Benjamin sighed. I hope you're right. For your sake and for Jacob's. Because if this goes wrong, it's not just you who'll be hurt by it. They parted with an awkward handshake, and Cole went back into the store to find Miriam. She was waiting by the door, her purchases already wrapped. One look at Cole's face told her the conversation hadn't gone well. He knows, she said as they walked to the wagon. He suspects, Cole corrected, but he won't say anything. He's a good friend. A good friend who thinks you're making a mistake, Miriam observed. Yes, Cole admitted. They rode back to the ranch in silence, both of them thinking about what Benjamin had said. The weight of the lie was growing heavier, the risks more apparent. Tomorrow Jacob would arrive, and they'd have to commit fully to the deception. There would be no backing out, no changing their minds, no way to undo it once Jacob walked through that door and saw his father with a wife who didn't really exist. That evening, Cole pulled out the family Bible. It was a massive leather-bound volume that had belonged to his grandfather, passed down through generations. Inside the front cover were the family records, births, marriages, deaths, all recorded in various hands across 100 years. Miriam found him in the parlor, staring at the page where Jacob's birth was recorded in Anna's careful script. Below that, Anna's death, recorded in Cole's heavier hand. The space for future entries sat blank and accusatory. He'll want to see this, Cole said. It's tradition. When someone important happens in the family, we record it in the Bible. Births, marriages, deaths. Jacob knows that. He'll expect to see our marriage recorded here. Miriam sat beside him. Then we should record it. That makes it feel more real, Cole said. More permanent. Like we're not just lying to Jacob, but lying to history itself. We're already lying to Jacob, Miriam pointed out. This is just one more layer of the same deception. If you're going to do this, you have to commit to it fully. Halfway lies are the ones that get caught. Cole knew she was right. He picked up the pen and dipped it in ink. His hand hovered over the page, reluctant to make the mark that would solidify the falsehood. But then he thought of Jacob arriving tomorrow, of the 3 days they'd have together, of the chance, however slim, to build something better than 2 decades of silence. He wrote carefully, "Cole Merritt married to Miriam Hayes, April 1st. The date was a lie. They'd met less than a week ago, but it was the date they'd agreed on for their story. He set down the pen and looked at the fresh entry. It looked just like all the others, legitimate and official. There, he said. Now it's in the family record. Now it's as real as we can make it without actually being real. Miriam reached out and touched the page gently, her finger tracing over her own name written in Cole's hand. In another life, maybe this would have been true. Maybe we would have met and married and built something genuine. In another life, I wouldn't have driven my son away, Cole said. In another life, Anna would still be here. In another life, I wouldn't need to lie to get my own son to spend 3 days with me. But this is the life we have, Miriam said. And tomorrow we face it together. They spent the rest of the evening in quiet preparation. Cole checked and rechecked the house, making sure everything looked right, that their story would hold up under Jacob's scrutiny. Miriam reviewed the details of their fabricated courtship and marriage, memorizing dates and events that had never happened. As midnight approached, they stood together on the porch one last time before Jacob's arrival. The ranch spread out before them in darkness, familiar and foreign at once. So much had changed in less than a week. The house felt different, lived in again. Cole felt different, less alone, even though the companionship was borrowed and temporary. Tomorrow changes everything, Cole said. Tomorrow changes everything, Miriam agreed. Are you ready? No, Cole said honestly. But I'm out of time to prepare. Jacob will be here by noon. And then we'll find out if all of this was worth it. Miriam reached out and squeezed his hand briefly, a gesture of comfort, of solidarity, of 2 people bound together by a shared deception and a hope that somehow, despite the lies, something true might emerge. They went inside and up to their separate rooms. Cole lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what he'd say when he saw Jacob for the first time in 20 years. Every script he imagined felt inadequate, every greeting hollow. Finally, exhaustion claimed him. He dreamed of Anna, of Jacob as a boy, of a time when the house had been full of life and laughter and the simple certainty that family was forever. He woke to the first light of dawn, with tears on his face and the knowledge that today, everything he'd carefully constructed would either save him or destroy him. There was no middle ground anymore. Jacob was coming home. The wagon arrived at 11:30 in the morning. Cole heard it before he saw it, the familiar sound of horses and wheels on the dirt road leading to the ranch house. He was standing on the porch, Miriam beside him, both of them dressed carefully for this moment. Cole wore his best shirt and vest. Miriam wore a simple but respectable dress, her hair pinned up, Anna's ring visible on her finger. The wagon crested the rise, and Cole got his first look at his son in 20 years. Jacob sat on the driver's seat, a woman beside him, Sophie presumably. Even from a distance, Cole could see that Jacob had grown into a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his features a blend of Cole's own and Anna's softer lines. The wagon pulled up in front of the house, and Jacob climbed down, then turned to help Sophie. She was younger than Jacob by a few years, with kind eyes and a practical manner in the way she gathered her skirts. She looked around at the ranch with genuine interest. Not the judgment or dismissal Cole had feared. Jacob stood there for a moment, looking at the house he'd grown up in, at the porch where he'd sat countless evenings, at the father he hadn't seen since he was 18. His face was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "Jacob," Cole said, his voice catching slightly. "Welcome home, Father," Jacob replied, and the formality of it cut like a knife. Then his eyes moved to Miriam, and something flickered in his expression, confusion maybe, or surprise. "And you must be Miriam," she said, stepping forward with a warm smile. "Your father's wife. It's wonderful to finally meet you. He's talked about nothing else since we got your letter." Sophie came up the steps, her smile genuine. "I'm Sophie Grant. It's so nice to meet you both." Jacob's told me so much about growing up here. They all stood awkwardly for a moment, four people trying to navigate a situation loaded with unspoken history and present deception. Finally, Cole found his voice. "Come in, please. You must be tired from the journey. We've prepared lunch." They moved inside, and Cole watched Jacob's eyes take in everything, the familiar layout, but also the changes. The updated curtains, the fresh flowers on the table, the signs of a woman living here. Jacob's expression remained carefully controlled, but Cole could see him processing, analyzing, trying to understand. Lunch was pot roast, made from Anna's recipe. Cole and Miriam had prepared it that morning, following the instructions exactly. As they ate, the conversation remained surface level and polite. Questions about the journey, comments about the weather, observations about how the town had grown. Sophie did most of the talking, asking Miriam questions about how she'd met Cole, how she liked ranch life, what it was like living in such a remote place. Miriam answered smoothly, sticking to their prepared story, her responses believable and warm. Jacob remained mostly quiet, watching his father and Miriam with an intensity that made Cole increasingly nervous. Several times, Cole caught Jacob looking at the ring on Miriam's finger. Then at Cole, his expression unreadable. After lunch, Sophie asked if she might see the house, expressing interest in where Jacob had grown up. Miriam offered to show her around, giving Cole and Jacob time alone. The two women disappeared upstairs, their voices fading, leaving father and son facing each other across the dining room table. "So," Jacob said finally, "you got married." "I did," Cole said. 6 months ago. Miriam's a good woman. We met in town and, well, things developed naturally." "Naturally," Jacob repeated. "You didn't mention it in your response to my letter. It seemed like the kind of news better delivered in person," Cole said, knowing how weak that sounded. Jacob stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch. "This place looks the same as I remember. Bigger, maybe, more land, but the same." "We've expanded," Cole said. "Good years, mostly. The ranch is doing well, and you were alone all this time. After Mother died." The question was casual, but Cole heard the weight behind it. "Yes, for 7 years. Then I met Miriam." Jacob turned back to face him. "It's interesting timing, isn't it? I write to say I'm coming to visit for the first time in 20 years, and suddenly you have a wife." Cole felt his stomach drop. "Jacob, what are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Jacob said. "I'm just observing that it's convenient. The prodigal son returns, and suddenly his father isn't a lonely widower anymore. Suddenly he's moved on, found happiness, become the kind of man who deserves forgiveness." "That's not," Cole started, but Jacob held up a hand. "I'm not accusing you of anything, father. I'm just noting the coincidence." He walked to the mantel and picked up the broken pocket watch, turning it over in his hands. "You kept this. I thought you'd have thrown it away." "I couldn't," Cole said quietly. "It stopped at the exact moment at the moment you left. 3:17, Jacob said, reading the frozen time. "I remember. I threw it at you. Acted like a child having a tantrum. I'm not proud of that. I'm the one who should apologize," Cole said. "I drove you away. I gave you an ultimatum that never should have been given. I chose pride over my own son, and I've regretted it every day since." Jacob set down the watch and looked at his father with an expression Cole couldn't quite read. "Have you?" Before Cole could answer, Miriam and Sophie returned from upstairs. Sophie was smiling, clearly charmed by the house and the stories Miriam had shared. But as they entered the room, Sophie pulled something from her pocket, a folded piece of paper. "I hope you don't mind," Sophie said to Cole. "But I found this in Jacob's old room. It was tucked into one of his books. A letter, I think, though it's never been opened." She handed it to Jacob, who unfolded it and read. His face changed as he read, going from neutral to something harder to interpret. When he finished, he looked up at Cole with an expression of dawning realization. "This is from you," Jacob said. "Dated 3 years ago, hidden in my room. Why would you write me a letter and leave it in my room instead of sending it to me?" Cole felt the ground shifting beneath him. That must have been, I don't remember, but Jacob was already moving, going to the study with purpose. Cole followed, dread building in his chest. Jacob went straight to the desk and pulled open the bottom drawer, the one that had been unlocked since Cole had shown Miriam the letters yesterday. Inside were dozens of envelopes, all addressed to Jacob, none of them mailed. Jacob pulled them out, his hand shaking slightly. He opened one, then another, reading quickly. With each letter, his expression grew more complicated. Hurt, anger, confusion, and something that might have been understanding, all competing for dominance. "You've been writing to me," Jacob said. "For years. Dozens of letters. But you never sent any of them." Sophie moved closer to Jacob, her hand on his arm, offering silent support. Miriam stood in the doorway, her face pale. "I couldn't," Cole said. "I wanted to reach out, but I didn't know how. I didn't know what to say that would make up for what I'd done. So I wrote, but I couldn't bring myself to actually send them." Jacob held up one of the letters. "This one's about Mother's funeral. You wrote that you wished I'd been there, that you'd looked for me in the crowd but didn't see me." He looked at his father with something raw in his eyes. "I was there, Father. I came. I stood in the back of the church and left before anyone could see me. I was too ashamed to face you, too angry still, but I couldn't not come. And you say in this letter that you wished I'd been there, but you never told me that. You never reached out to say it." Cole felt something break inside him. "You were at Anna's funeral?" "In the back," Jacob said. "I saw you standing by the grave, saw how alone you looked, and I wanted—" His voice cracked. "I wanted to go to you, to stand with you. But I couldn't make myself do it. 20 years of silence doesn't break that easily." Sophie, who'd been quietly observing, now spoke up. "Jacob told me about the estrangement, about the argument and the years that followed. He said he'd wanted to reach out many times, but didn't know how." She looked between father and son. "It seems both of you have been trying to find your way back to each other, but couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap." Miriam stepped forward. "Perhaps I should explain something," but Jacob held up his hand. "No, wait. There's more." He pulled out his own wallet and extracted a faded photograph. He handed it to Cole. Cole looked at the photograph and felt his knees go weak. It showed a crowd of people at a university graduation ceremony. And there in the back, barely visible but definitely present, was Cole himself. He'd gone to Jacob's graduation, had traveled back east secretly, had watched from the crowd, had left without making himself known because he'd been too proud, too ashamed, too afraid of rejection. "I found this years later," Jacob said. "A photographer had taken pictures of the graduation for the university archive. I was looking through them and saw you there. You came to my graduation. You were there, and I never knew it." The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. 4 people stood in that study, surrounded by 20 years of missed connections and unspoken words, all of them realizing that the silence had been maintained not by lack of caring, but by an overabundance of pride and fear on both sides. Finally, Sophie spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. "I think there's something else we need to address." She looked at Miriam, then at Cole. "I'm a researcher by trade. Before we came here, I did what any careful person would do. I looked into Jacob's family, wanted to understand the history, and I couldn't find any record of a marriage between Cole Merritt and Miriam Hayes. No record in the county, no announcement in the local paper, no witnesses I could find who remember a wedding. The silence that followed was devastating. Cole couldn't speak, couldn't move. Miriam's face had gone white. Jacob looked at his father with an expression of profound disappointment. "Is she right? Is this whole thing, Miriam, the marriage, the happy reunion, is it all a performance?" Cole opened his mouth, but no words came out. The lie he'd so carefully constructed, the desperate gamble he'd made, it was all collapsing around him. And the worst part was seeing the hurt in Jacob's eyes, the realization that his father had tried to deceive him from the very first moment of their reunion. "Yes," Miriam said quietly, when it became clear Cole couldn't answer. "It's not real. Your father asked me to pretend to be his wife for your visit. We thought, that if you saw him happy and settled, you might give him a chance. We were wrong." Jacob stood there, the letters still in his hands, the photograph of his father at his graduation ceremony visible on the desk, and now the truth of the deception laid bare. His face cycled through emotions too quickly to track: betrayal, anger, hurt, and beneath it all, a crushing disappointment. "I came here to reconcile," Jacob said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sophie encouraged me to reach out, to try one more time to bridge the gap with my father. And instead of honesty, instead of a real conversation, I find this. Another lie. Another manipulation." "Jacob," Cole started, but his son shook his head. "No, I don't want to hear excuses. I don't want to hear about how you were trying to help, or how you thought this was the right thing to do." Jacob carefully set the letters back in the drawer. "I thought maybe enough time had passed, that maybe we could find our way past what happened. But this," he gestured at Miriam, at the house, at the whole elaborate deception. "This is worse than silence. At least silence is honest." He turned to Sophie. "We should go." "Jacob, wait," Sophie said. "Maybe if we just—" "There's nothing to talk about," Jacob said. "My father would rather lie to me than have an honest conversation. That tells me everything I need to know." He walked out of the study, Sophie following after casting an apologetic look at Cole and Miriam. They heard Jacob's boots on the stairs, the sound of bags being gathered, the finality of people leaving sooner than expected. Cole stood frozen in his study, surrounded by decades of unsent letters and yesterday's lies, watching his second chance slip away even faster than the first one had. And this time he had no one to blame but himself. Miriam moved first. She ran after Jacob and Sophie, catching them on the stairs. "Please," she said. "Please just give him 5 minutes. Let him explain why he lied to me," Jacob said, turning to face her. His voice was cold, controlled in a way that suggested deep hurt underneath. Why he thought deceiving me was better than just telling me the truth. What explanation could possibly make that acceptable? "None," Miriam admitted. "There's no excuse for what we did. But Jacob, your father has been trying to reach you for 20 years. Those letters, he's been writing to you constantly. He just couldn't find the courage to send them, and that's supposed to make this better." Jacob shook his head. "My father is a coward. He was a coward when he drove me away with an ultimatum he knew I couldn't accept. He was a coward when he let 20 years pass without reaching out. And he's a coward now, hiring a stranger to play his wife rather than facing me honestly." The words hit like physical blows. Miriam saw Cole standing at the bottom of the stairs now, hearing every word, his face ashen. Sophie put her hand on Jacob's arm again. "Jacob, I know you're hurt, but maybe we should hear him out. Come this far, at least finish the conversation." "What conversation?" Jacob demanded. "Everything he's told me today has been a lie. How do I know anything else he says would be true?" "Because I'm done lying," Cole said from the bottom of the stairs. His voice was rough but steady. "Jacob, you're right. About all of it. I'm a coward. I have been for 20 years. But I'm asking you, begging you, for 5 minutes. 5 minutes of truth. If after that you still want to leave, I won't stop you." Jacob looked at his father, at the broken old man standing in the house that had been his childhood home. And something in his expression shifted slightly. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe a willingness to listen. 5 minutes, Jacob said. "And then we're leaving." They moved back down to the parlor, all 4 of them this time, because Sophie refused to leave Jacob's side, and Miriam felt she owed it to Cole to witness whatever came next. They sat in uncomfortable proximity, the broken pocket watch still visible on the mantel, Anna's recipe box on the side table, all the props of their careful deception now just evidence of desperation. Cole stood rather than sat, unable to remain still. He paced to the window, looked out at his ranch, then turned back to face his son. "I don't know where to start," he admitted. "Start with the truth," Jacob said. "For once in 20 years, just tell me the—" "Truth," Cole took a deep breath. "The truth is that I made the worst mistake of my life when I gave you that ultimatum. I thought I was protecting the ranch, protecting our legacy, making sure you'd have something solid to stand on. But really, I was protecting my own pride. I'd built all this from nothing, and I couldn't accept that it wasn't enough for you. That you wanted something different. I never said it wasn't enough, Jacob interrupted. I never said I didn't appreciate what you built. I just wanted to be something other than a rancher. Why was that so terrible? It wasn't, Cole said simply. I know that now. I knew it even then, if I'm being honest. Your mother tried to tell me. She said I was going to lose you if I kept pushing. She was right. But I was too stubborn to listen, too certain I knew best. He paused, gathering courage. When you left, I convinced myself you'd come back, that you'd realize you'd made a mistake, that you'd choose family over ambition. I was wrong about that too. I did choose family, Jacob said quietly. I chose the family Mother was trying to build, one where I could be myself and still be loved. You're the one who said I had to choose between being your son and being who I wanted to be. Cole nodded, accepting the hit. You're right. And then, when the letters started coming, the ones you sent to your mother, I'd listen to her read them and I'd be so angry. Angry at you for leaving, angry at myself for driving you away, angry at the whole situation. I thought if I just waited, if I stayed firm, you'd eventually see things my way. But I never did, Jacob said. No. And after your mother died, I realized I'd wasted all that time. I'd chosen pride over my son, and then I'd lost my wife too. Everything I'd tried to protect, to build, it didn't matter anymore, because I had no one to share it with. Cole's voice cracked. I started writing you letters. Every time something happened, good or bad, I'd write to you, tell you about it, ask your advice sometimes, even though you couldn't answer. It became a habit, a way to feel like you were still part of my life, even though you weren't. Why didn't you send them? Jacob asked, and now there was less anger in his voice, more genuine confusion, because every time I tried, I'd imagine you reading them and throwing them away. Or worse, reading them and feeling nothing. They'd built up 20 years of silence between us, and I couldn't figure out how to break it. So I kept writing, and I kept not sending, and the pile of letters just got bigger, and the distance between us just got wider. Sophie spoke up for the first time since they'd sat down. Mr. Merritt, can I ask you something? When you got Jacob's letter saying he was coming to visit, what was your first feeling? Cole thought about it honestly. Terror, he said. Pure terror. Because I knew this was probably my last chance, and I had no idea how to make it work. Jacob was coming with his fiancée, and I was still this lonely, bitter old man in a house full of ghosts. I thought, he stopped, shaking his head, I thought if he saw that I'd moved on, that I'd found some kind of happiness again, he might think I'd changed, that I'd learned something from losing him and losing Anna. So you hired someone to play a part, Jacob said. I asked Miriam to help me, Cole corrected. And yes, it was dishonest and wrong, and exactly the kind of manipulative thing I've always hated. But I was desperate. And he looked at Miriam. She agreed because she saw something in me that reminded her of herself. Two people who'd lost too much and didn't know how to move forward, Miriam nodded. I lost my husband 5 years ago. Since then, I've been running, never staying anywhere long enough to face how alone I was. When Cole asked me to pretend to be his wife, I saw a man who was just as lost as I was. And foolishly, I thought maybe helping him would somehow help me too. Did it? Sophie asked gently. No, Miriam said. It just made things worse. Because in trying to fix his relationship with his son through deception, we've probably destroyed any chance they had at real reconciliation. The room fell silent. Cole moved to sit down finally, suddenly exhausted. He looked old in that moment, worn down by years of regret and the weight of his latest failure. Jacob stood and walked to the desk in the study. He came back with the drawer full of letters, setting it on the coffee table between them. I want to read these, he said. All of them. I want to know what you've been trying to say to me for 20 years. Jacob, you don't have to. Cole started. Yes, I do, Jacob interrupted. Because you're right about one thing. We've wasted 20 years. And I'm tired of wasting time. I'm tired of being angry at you. I'm tired of missing my father. His voice broke slightly. Do you know how many times I've almost written to you? How many letters I started and threw away because I didn't know what to say? How many times I've thought about coming home but talked myself out of it? You were at your mother's funeral, Cole said. I didn't know that until today. If I had known, what would you have done? Jacob asked. Would you have come to me, talked to me, or would you have let me leave without saying anything because you were too proud or too scared? Cole wanted to say he would have done the right thing, but he couldn't lie anymore. I don't know, he admitted. I'd like to think I would have reached out, but honestly I don't know. At least that's honest, Jacob said. They sat there for a long moment, father and son, separated by 20 years and one coffee table covered in unsent letters. Sophie watched them both with a clinical eye, the researcher in her analyzing the dynamics, looking for the path forward. Miriam sat quietly, feeling like an intruder in a family moment that she'd helped to destroy. Finally, Sophie spoke. I have a suggestion. Instead of leaving today like we planned, why don't we stay? Not at the boarding house like we originally intended, but here. Give you two some time to actually talk, honestly, without deception or pretense. Read these letters together. Share the stories you've been keeping from each other. Try to find your way to something real. I don't know if that's a good idea, Jacob said. Why not? Sophie challenged. Are you afraid you might forgive him? Afraid you might actually reconnect with your father after? The next morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost painful. Cole woke early, as he always did, but instead of the usual silence of an empty house, he heard voices downstairs. Jacob and Sophie had stayed the night, taking the guest room since Miriam had moved her things to the smaller room at the end of the hall. Cole dressed and went downstairs to find all three of them already in the kitchen. Jacob was making coffee, using Anna's old pot, the way she'd taught him when he was 12. The sight of it made Cole's throat tight. Morning, Jacob said, looking up. There was still wariness in his eyes, but also something softer than yesterday's anger. Hope you don't mind. I couldn't sleep much, so I thought I'd make myself useful. I don't mind, Cole said. It's good to see that pot being used again. Your mother always said coffee tastes better when someone makes it for you than when you make it for yourself. They gathered around the kitchen table with their coffee. Outside, the ranch was coming to life, the sounds of cattle, the distant voices of ranch hands starting their day's work. It was familiar and comforting, the rhythm of a life Cole had built, but had been experiencing alone for too long. Sophie cleared her throat gently. I know yesterday was difficult for everyone, but I think we should address something important. We uncovered the deception, we read some of the letters, we had an emotional reunion, but there's still a lot unsaid. Things that need to be discussed openly if you're going to truly move forward. What do you suggest? Cole asked. Complete honesty, Sophie said. No more skirting around difficult topics. Ask the questions you've been afraid to ask. Say the things you've been too proud to say. This might be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Jacob nodded slowly. She's right. I have questions, Father. Things I've wondered about for 20 years, but never had the courage to ask. Then ask them, Cole said. I'll answer as honestly as I can. Jacob took a breath. Why did you really give me that ultimatum? Was it about the ranch, or was it about something else? About control, maybe, or fear that I was rejecting everything you'd built. Cole considered the question carefully. It was about fear, he admitted. Fear that if you left, I'd lose you completely. Fear that your mother had been right all along about letting you find your own path, which meant admitting I'd been wrong. And yes, fear that you choosing something different meant you were rejecting me, rejecting everything I'd worked for, rejecting the life I thought we'd share. He paused. But mostly I think I was afraid of change, of the future being different from what I'd imagined, of having to let go. You never said any of that, Jacob said quietly. You just made it sound like it was about duty and family obligation, because admitting fear felt like weakness, Cole said. And I was raised to believe men don't show weakness, don't admit when they're scared or uncertain. So I hid behind duty and obligation and all those other words that made it seem like I had a good reason for being unreasonable. Miriam, who'd been quietly listening, spoke up. Can I ask something? Jacob, when you left that day, when you threw the watch and walked out, did you want your father to come after you? Were you hoping he'd stop you? Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he finally said, Part of me was hoping he'd come running after me, say he was wrong, tell me to go follow my dreams with his blessing. I walked slowly to the stage depot, kept looking back, waiting for him to appear. When he didn't, I told myself I didn't care. But I did. I cared terribly. Cole felt that admission like a physical blow. I stood on the porch and watched you go. I wanted to run after you, wanted to call you back, wanted to take it all back. But I was too proud, too certain that if I gave in, I'd lose everything. So I let you leave, and I lost everything anyway. We were both waiting for the other to make the first move, Jacob said. Both too stubborn to reach out. And that stubbornness cost us 20 years. Sophie reached out and took Jacob's hand. There's something else that needs to be addressed. Jacob, you need to tell your father why you really came here. Not just the surface reason, to introduce me to your family. The real reason. Jacob looked at Sophie, then at his father. I came because I'm getting married in 3 months. And I realized I couldn't stand at that altar and promise to build a life with Sophie while still carrying 20 years of hurt and anger toward my own father. I came to try one more time to reconcile, to see if maybe enough time had passed that we could find our way back to each other. You were coming to reconcile, Cole said, his voice breaking slightly. And I greeted you with lies and deception. Yes, Jacob said. You did, and I was furious. But I've thought about it since yesterday, and I think I understand why. You were desperate. You'd been alone and stuck for so long that you couldn't see any other way forward. It doesn't excuse the deception, but I understand it. Miriam stood up and retrieved the gold coin from where she'd left it on the mantel. She brought it back to the table and set it between them. I need to say something too. When Cole asked me to pretend to be his wife, I said yes for 2 reasons. The first was the money. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But the second reason was that I saw myself in him. I'd been running for 5 years, never staying anywhere long enough to face my own grief and loneliness. Cole was the opposite, stuck in one place, unable to move forward. But we were both trapped by loss in our own ways. She looked at Cole, then at Jacob. What we did was wrong. But spending this week here, pretending to be part of a family, cooking in Anna's kitchen, following her recipes, helping Cole prepare for your visit, it reminded me what I've been missing. It reminded me that running away doesn't heal anything. It just postpones the pain. What will you do now? Sophie asked gently. I don't know, Miriam admitted. I can't stay here. That would just be continuing the deception in a different form. But I also don't want to go back to wandering aimlessly. I think maybe it's time to stop running and figure out how to build a life again instead of just passing through other people's lives. Cole reached out and picked up the gold coin. He turned it over in his hands, remembering the moment he'd offered it to Miriam, the desperation that had driven him to such measures. You should keep this, he said, offering it back to her. Not as payment for the deception, but as a reminder. You helped me in ways that had nothing to do with pretending to be my wife. You helped me see that I needed to change, that I couldn't keep living in the past. That's worth more than a gold coin, Miriam shook her head. I can't. Every time I'd look at it, I'd remember that I helped deceive your son. That's not a memory I want to carry. Then let me keep it, Jacob said, surprising everyone. He reached for the coin and held it up to the light. Let me keep it as a reminder of how close we came to losing each other again. How deception nearly destroyed our last chance at reconciliation. And how honesty, even painful honesty, is what finally brought us back together. He looked at his father. You made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But you were trying in your own misguided way to fix things. And that matters. It doesn't excuse what you did, but it matters that you cared enough to try, even if you went about it wrong. Cole felt tears on his face and didn't bother to wipe them away. I'm sorry, Jacob, for the ultimatum, for the 20 years of silence, for the deception yesterday. For all of it. You deserve better than what I gave you. You deserved a father who could put your happiness ahead of his own pride, and you deserved a son who tried harder to understand you, Jacob said, who didn't just walk away and stay away out of hurt and stubbornness. We both made mistakes, Father. Maybe it's time we forgave each other for them. They stood and moved toward each other, meeting in an embrace that felt more natural than yesterday's awkward hug. This time they held on longer, two men who'd been lost to each other for too long, finally finding their way home. When they pulled apart, Jacob reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the broken pocket watch. He held it out to his father. "I kept this," Jacob said. "All these years I carried it with me. I had it repaired after a few years. Couldn't stand looking at the broken glass and stopped hands anymore. But I kept it with me as a reminder of where I came from, of the father I'd left behind, of the moment when everything fractured between us." Cole took the watch with shaking hands. The glass was new, perfectly clear. The hands moved smoothly, ticking away the seconds. It had been restored to working order, just as he and Jacob were trying to restore their relationship. "You fixed it," Cole said. "I fixed the watch," Jacob said. "Now we need to fix what's between us. It won't be easy. We have 20 years of distance to bridge, 20 years of missed moments and unshared experiences. But I'm willing to try if you are." "I am," Cole said. "More than willing. I'll do whatever it takes." "Then let's start with the truth," Jacob said. "No more secrets, no more unsent letters. If you have something to say to me, say it. If I have questions, I'll ask them. We communicate honestly, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "Agreed," Cole said. Sophie and Miriam watched this exchange with matching expressions of relief and hope. What had started as deception had somehow, through painful honesty and forced confrontation, led to something real. It wasn't the reunion anyone had planned, but it was the reunion they needed. They spent that day together as a family, something they hadn't been able to do in 20 years. Cole showed Jacob and Sophie around the expanded ranch, pointing out the changes and improvements that had been made. Jacob asked questions about the business side of ranching, showing genuine interest in what his father had built, even if it wasn't the life he'd chosen for himself. At one point, as they stood on a ridge overlooking the south pasture, Jacob said, "You've done well, Father. This is impressive. The size, the organization, the quality of the operation. I can see why this place means so much to you." "It doesn't mean as much as I thought it did," Cole admitted. "I spent 20 years building this empire, and for what? There was no one to share it with, no one to pass it to. Just more land and more cattle and more silence. What will you do with it?" Sophie asked. "Eventually, I mean. Have you thought about succession?" Cole shook his head. "I've avoided thinking about it. Seemed pointless when I had no heirs who wanted it. But maybe now," he looked at Jacob, "would you ever consider taking it over? Not now, I know you have your law practice back east, but someday." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "I don't think so, Father. This was your dream, not mine. And I've built a life elsewhere that I'm proud of. But," he paused, "that doesn't mean it has to go to strangers. Maybe you could train someone, Hank perhaps, or one of the other hands who's shown promise. Make them a partner, give them a path to ownership. That way your legacy continues, even if it's not with blood family." Cole nodded slowly. "That's a good thought. Better than what I'd been doing, which was nothing." They walked back to the house together, the four of them. Miriam had spent the afternoon baking bread and preparing vegetables from the garden Anna had planted years ago that Cole had somehow managed to keep alive. The house smelled like yeast and herbs, like a home that was lived in rather than just occupied. That evening, they gathered in the parlor after dinner. The conversation had been flowing more naturally all day, but there was still one more difficult topic that needed to be addressed. Jacob was the one who brought it up. "I need to ask you something, Father, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "All right," Cole said, bracing himself. "At Mother's funeral," Jacob said, "you wrote in one of your letters that you wished I'd been there. But I was there, and I saw you, saw how alone you looked, how broken. Why didn't you come find me?" "You must have seen me leave." Cole closed his eyes, the memory as painful now as it had been 7 years ago. "I did see you. Just a glimpse as you were leaving through the back of the church. And I wanted to run after you, wanted to call out, wanted to ask you to stay. But I thought," he stopped, forcing himself to continue, "I thought you'd only come out of obligation to your mother, that seeing me would just make things worse for you. So I let you go, and I told myself it was for the best. That you were better off without me in your life. I wasn't, Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. I left because I was a coward. Because I couldn't face you without breaking down, and I thought you'd see that as weakness. I drove 3 days to get there, stood in the back of that church for the entire service, and then left without saying a word to you. And I've regretted it every day since. I've regretted it too, Cole said. That was our chance, our moment to reconnect over shared grief, and we both let it slip away because we were too afraid to reach out. Sophie spoke gently. But you're reaching out now. That's what matters. You're not letting this moment slip away. Jacob pulled something else from his pocket, a folded piece of paper, worn and creased from being carried for years. He handed it to Cole. I wrote you a letter, Jacob said. The night after Mother's funeral, I sat in my hotel room and wrote everything I wished I'd said to you. I carried it with me for years, thinking maybe someday I'd have the courage to send it. But like you, I never did. Cole unfolded the letter with trembling hands and began to read. It was everything he'd needed to hear 7 years ago. Jacob's grief, his regret over the estrangement, his admission that he missed his father, his wish that they could find their way back to each other. And at the bottom, a simple line. I love you and I'm sorry we lost so much time. Cole couldn't speak. He just held the letter and let the tears fall, mourning all the years they'd wasted, all the words that had gone unspoken, all the moments they'd missed. Jacob moved to sit beside his father on the couch. We were both writing letters we couldn't send, both carrying around words we couldn't say, both too proud and too afraid to break the silence. No more silence, Cole said roughly. From now on, we talk. We write letters that actually get mailed. We stay in each other's lives, even when it's difficult, even when we don't know what to say. Agreed, Jacob said. He looked at the repaired pocket watch sitting on the coffee table. I want you to keep this as a reminder that broken things can be fixed. That time can start moving again, even after years of being frozen. Cole picked up the watch and held it close. Your grandfather gave this to me when I was 16. Told me it had been in the family for 3 generations, and I was to pass it to my son someday. When you threw it at me, when it broke, I thought that was the end of the line, the end of our family connection. But you kept it anyway, Jacob said. Just like you kept my room exactly as I'd left it. Just like you kept writing letters you never sent. You never really gave up on me, did you? Never, Cole said. Not once in 20 years. Even when I told myself it was over, that too much time had passed, that you'd moved on without me, I never stopped hoping you'd come home. I'm here now, Jacob said simply. And I'm not leaving until we figure this out. All of it. How to be father and son again. How to build something real instead of living with ghosts and regrets. They talked late into the night, the 4 of them. They talked about Anna, about the life she'd wanted for all of them, about how she would have handled the estrangement if she'd lived. They talked about Sophie and Jacob's upcoming wedding, about whether Cole would be willing to come, to stand as father of the groom, despite their history. I'd be honored, Cole said when Jacob asked. If you'll have me there, if having me won't complicate things. You're my father, Jacob said. Of course I want you there. Sophie's been after me for months to reach out to you, to invite you. She said no wedding is complete without family, and you're the only family I have left. Sophie smiled. I told him he was being stubborn, that life is too short to hold grudges, especially with people we love. I'm glad we came. Glad we pushed through the difficult parts to get to this. Miriam had been mostly quiet through this conversation, feeling like an observer to a family reconciliation that she'd inadvertently catalyzed. But now Sophie turned to her. What about you, Miriam? Will you stay in touch with us? I know this started as a deception, but I feel like we've become friends through it. I'd like to keep knowing you. Miriam looked surprised. You'd want to stay in touch? Even after what I did. You helped bring a family back together, Sophie said. Maybe not in the way you intended, but you did. That counts for something. And besides, I like you. You're honest and practical and kind. Those are rare qualities. I'd like that, Miriam said softly. I'd like to have friends again. To have connections that aren't just temporary. They finally disperse to bed well after midnight. Cole walked through his house, No longer empty, no longer just a memorial to what he'd lost, but a home again with people in it. His son slept upstairs in the room they'd updated together. Sophie was beside him. Miriam was in the small room at the end of the hall. And Cole, for the first time in 20 years, felt something other than regret and loneliness. He felt hope. It was fragile and new and uncertain, but it was there. The future was no longer just empty years stretching ahead of him. Now it held possibilities, visits from Jacob and Sophie, grandchildren someday maybe, a continued relationship with Miriam as a friend, a life that was about more than just working and remembering. Before he went to sleep, Cole took out his journal. He'd started keeping one years ago when the unsent letters weren't enough. He wrote, "Today Jacob came home. It didn't happen the way I planned. It was messier and more painful than I'd imagined, but it happened. And tomorrow we start building something new, not trying to recreate the past or pretend the hurt never happened, but building something real from the broken pieces we've been carrying." Anna would be proud. "I think I finally am too." He closed the journal and went to bed. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cold, stars brilliant against the darkness. Inside, a house that had been frozen in grief for years was finally, slowly coming back to life. 2 weeks later, the ranch had settled into a new rhythm. Jacob and Sophie had extended their stay, wanting to make sure the reconciliation had solid foundations before they returned east. They'd spent the time talking with Cole. Long conversations that covered everything from childhood memories to future plans. From old hurts to new hopes. Miriam had also stayed, though she'd moved back to the boarding house in town after the first few days. It felt wrong to continue living at the ranch now that the deception was over, even though Cole had assured her she was welcome. But she visited often, coming for dinners and helping in the kitchen, building a genuine friendship with all of them that wasn't based on pretense. This particular morning, they all gathered at the ranch for breakfast one last time before Jacob and Sophie's departure. The kitchen was full of life and laughter, something that would have been unimaginable just 3 weeks ago. "I've been thinking," Jacob said as they sat around the table with coffee and fresh bread. "About the ranch and what you asked me, Father." "About succession." Cole looked up. "You've changed your mind?" "No," Jacob said. "I still don't want to take it over. That's not my path. But I was thinking we could establish something more formal. Set up a partnership arrangement where you train Hank or another trusted employee to eventually take ownership. I could help with the legal structure, make sure it's done properly. That way your legacy continues, and the people who've worked this land with you get the chance to own it themselves." "That's a fine idea," Cole said. "Better than anything I'd come up with on my own. Hank's earned it, and so have some of the others. They've been loyal for years. This place should go to people who love it, and you'll still be here to run it for years to come," Sophie added. "But it's good to have a plan, to know the future is secured." Cole nodded, feeling a weight lift. The ranch had been his burden and his purpose for so long. Now it could be something else, a legacy that would outlast him, that would benefit the people who'd helped build it. That felt right in a way that leaving it to strangers never had. After breakfast, Cole took Miriam aside on the porch. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out an envelope. "It's not much, but I want you to have it." Miriam opened the envelope and found a banknote, more money than the single gold coin he'd originally offered. She started to protest, but Cole held up his hand. "It's not payment for the deception," he said. "It's a loan, to help you get settled somewhere. Start a new life instead of wandering. You said you wanted to stop running, wanted to build something real. Consider this a chance to do that." "Cole, I can't accept this." "You can," Cole insisted, "and you will, because you helped me more than you know, and I want to help you in return. Besides," he smiled slightly, "I'm hoping you'll settle somewhere close by. Benton Creek could use a good schoolteacher, and I could use a friend nearby. Someone who knows the whole messy truth and doesn't judge me for it." Miriam looked at the note, then at Cole's face. "You really want me to stay in the area?" "I do," Cole said. "If you'd be willing. I know it's not the mountains or the next adventure, But maybe it's time we both stopped running from ourselves and started building the lives we actually want instead of the lives we settled for." Miriam folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket. "I'll think about it. But Cole, thank you for this and for showing me that it's possible to face the past and still have a future." "We helped each other," Cole said simply. "That's what people do when they stop pretending and start being honest." Later that afternoon, as Jacob and Sophie prepared to leave, they gathered for a photograph on the front porch. It was Sophie's idea. She'd brought a camera and wanted to document the reunion. They arranged themselves carefully, Cole and Jacob in the center, Sophie beside Jacob, Miriam on Cole's other side. Hank had been enlisted to operate the camera. "Smile," Hank called out. "This is a happy day." And they did smile, genuine smiles, not the forced ones people put on for photographs they don't want taken. The camera clicked, capturing a moment that represented not an ending, but a beginning. A family fractured but healing, strangers become friends, a house that had been a tomb, becoming a home again. After the photograph, Jacob pulled his father aside one more time. "We'll write," he said. "Real letters that actually get mailed. And I'll visit again, not in 20 years, but soon. Maybe bring you to the city to see where we live, introduce you to my friends and colleagues, let you be part of my life the way I should have let you be all along." "I'd like that," Cole said, his voice thick. "And you're always welcome here, any time, for any reason, or no reason at all." They embraced, and this time it was easy and natural. The awkwardness had worn away over 2 weeks of honest conversation and shared meals, and building something real from the rubble of deception. Sophie hugged Cole too. "Thank you for letting me be part of this, for welcoming me, even though I was the one who uncovered your secret. And thank you for agreeing to come to the wedding. It wouldn't be complete without you." "I'll be there," Cole promised. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." The wagon was loaded, goodbyes were said, and then Jacob and Sophie were driving away down the long road from the ranch. Cole stood on the porch watching them go, Miriam beside him. "They'll come back," Miriam said. "This time they'll come back." "I know," Cole said. And he did know it. The silence was broken. The distance was shrinking. They had a future together now, even if it looked different from the one Cole had imagined when Jacob was a boy. That evening, Cole sat in his study with the broken pocket watch, now repaired, and the drawer of letters that Jacob had left behind, saying he wanted his father to keep them as a reminder of how far they'd come. Cole pulled out fresh paper and began to write. "Dear Jacob," he started, and this time the words came easily. This letter would be mailed, and Jacob would read it, and he would write back. The silence that had lasted 20 years was finally, truly over. Cole wrote about the changes he planned to make with the ranch partnership. He wrote about Miriam staying in the area and how that felt like gaining family, even though they weren't related. He wrote about small things, the weather, a new foal born that morning, plans to update the barn before winter. Ordinary things that made up a life, shared between father and son, because that's what families did. When he finished, he sealed the envelope and addressed it. Tomorrow he'd ride to town and mail it, and a few days after that, Jacob would receive it and know that his father was thinking of him, that the connection they'd rebuilt was real and lasting. Cole looked around his study, the ledgers documenting years of success that had felt hollow without anyone to share it with, the maps showing land acquisitions that had meant nothing without family to pass them to, the empty chair where Anna used to sit and read while he worked. The room looked the same as it had for years, but everything had changed. He wasn't alone anymore. He had his son back. He had a friend in Miriam. He had a future that stretched beyond just maintaining what he'd built. He had hope. The gold coin sat on his desk. Jacob had left it behind, saying Cole should keep it as a reminder. Cole picked it up and turned it over in his hands. It represented so much: his desperation, his willingness to lie, the deception that had almost cost him everything, but also the catalyst that had forced truth and brought healing. He put the coin in his desk drawer, not hidden away like the letters had been, but stored safely where he could find it when he needed the reminder. The reminder that sometimes the most desperate measures lead to unexpected grace, that mistakes can be survived, that it's never too late to try again, to be honest, to reach out. Cole stood and walked through the house, turning down lamps for the night. In each room, he saw not just what had been, but what could be. The dining room where they'd gathered for meals and honest conversations. The parlor where they'd read letters and shared tears. The kitchen where they'd cooked Anna's recipes and built new memories. This house had been a memorial for 7 years. Then it had been a stage for deception. Now it was becoming what it should have been all along. A home, not frozen in the past, not built on lies, but alive with possibility and connection and the simple gift of second chances. Cole went to bed that night, thinking about the photograph they'd taken that afternoon. Someday, probably soon, that photograph would sit on the mantel beside the old family pictures. It would show 4 people who'd found each other through unlikely circumstances, who'd survived deception and hurt and 20 years of silence to build something honest and real. It wasn't the story Cole had planned to tell. It wasn't the reunion he'd imagined, but it was true. And after so many years of lies and silence and regret, truth was worth more than any carefully constructed fiction. Outside, the Montana stars shone bright and cold. Inside, in a house that had been empty too long, a man slept peacefully for the first time in 20 years. The past was still there. It would always be there, but it no longer held him captive. He had a future now. He had family. He had hope. And sometimes, when you've lost everything, that's enough. More than enough. It's everything.